"You're either with this family, or you're against us," my mom proclaimed loudly at the dinner table. All because I refused to hand over my inheritance to help my sister chase her dream. I remained silent. Just stood up, grabbed my keys, and by next week, their mortgage and bank account were all frozen. I, 31M, sat at the kitchen table last Sunday, staring at the inheritance letter that had arrived 3 days earlier. My grandfather had passed 6 months ago, and his estate was finally being distributed. The number on the page still felt surreal, $850,000. Enough to change my life completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom asking me to come over for dinner. She mentioned that my sister would be there too, which immediately put me on edge. Family dinners had become strategic meetings lately, especially since my sister's latest entrepreneurial venture had crashed and burned. I arrived at my childhood home to find the dining room set with Mom's good china. The smell of pot roast filled the air, but something felt off. My sister sat fidgeting with her napkin, avoiding eye contact. Dad carved the roast in unusual silence while Mom bustled around with forced cheerfulness. We made small talk through the appetizer, but I could sense the tension building. My sister kept glancing at Mom, who would nod encouragingly. Finally, as Mom served the main course, she cleared her throat dramatically. She announced that we needed to discuss my inheritance. The words hit the table like a dropped plate. She explained that family meant supporting each other through thick and thin, and that my sister had an incredible opportunity that required immediate funding. My sister finally spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. She told me about her new business idea, a boutique consulting firm for small businesses. She had already lined up potential clients and found the perfect office space downtown. All she needed was $400,000 to get started. I set down my fork and looked around the table. Dad was studying his plate intently, clearly uncomfortable with the ambush. Mom's eyes burned with determination, while my sister looked desperate and hopeful. I reminded them that this was my inheritance, left to me specifically by Grandpa. I mentioned that my sister had already received her share of family support over the years. The failed food truck venture that cost them $50,000, the photography studio that lasted 8 months, and the online clothing boutique that left her $30,000 in debt. Mom's face flushed red. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her voice rose as she declared that blood was thicker than water, and that family came before personal greed. She insisted that I had always been selfish, even as a child, and that this was my chance to finally prove I cared about my family. The words that came next still echo in my mind. Mom pointed her finger at me and proclaimed loudly that I was either with this family or against them. She said there was no middle ground when it came to family loyalty, and that my refusal to help my sister proved where my true priorities lay. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I looked at each of their faces, Mom's righteous anger, my sister's pleading desperation, Dad's uncomfortable neutrality. Something cold settled in my chest. I remained completely silent. I stood up slowly, my chair making barely a sound against the carpet. I grabbed my keys from the side table and walked toward the front door. Behind me, Mom called out that I was making a huge mistake. That family was all we had in this world. I drove home in a strange state of calm. The betrayal felt oddly clarifying, like finally understanding the rules of a game I'd been playing wrong for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd bailed out my sister, all the family emergencies that somehow always required my money or time. The next morning, I made some calls. A private investigator I'd used for work came highly recommended for personal matters too. I asked him to look into my family's financial situation, all of it. Property records, bank accounts, credit reports, the works. 3 days later, he called with interesting news. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on their house 8 months ago. The money hadn't gone toward home improvements or retirement planning. Instead, they'd loaned it all to my sister for her previous failed business venture. They were now 3 months behind on payments. But that wasn't the most interesting part. My sister's new business idea wasn't just a pipe dream. She'd already secured a lease on office space and put down deposits with contractors. She was planning to use my inheritance money to cover costs she'd already committed to, essentially spending money she didn't have and hoping I'd bail her out. I spent the weekend researching financial law and making more calls. By Monday morning, I had a clear plan. My first stop was the bank where my parents held their mortgage. I'd co-signed some paperwork years ago when they refinanced, which gave me certain legal standing. I requested a full account review and discovered they were actually 4 months behind, not 3. The bank was already preparing foreclosure proceedings. I then visited my sister's new office building. The property manager was happy to discuss the lease, especially when I mentioned I was considering space in the same building. My sister had indeed signed a 5-year lease and paid first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. The total commitment was $180,000 over the lease term. That evening, I made a series of phone calls. I contacted the property manager and informed him that my sister had committed fraud by signing a lease without secured funding. I provided documentation showing her actual financial status versus what she'd claimed on her application. I also called my parents' mortgage company and informed them that any cosigner privileges I'd previously held were hereby revoked. I requested that all future communications go directly to the primary borrowers only. The next day brought the first consequences. My sister called me in tears, saying her lease had been terminated due to misrepresentation of financial status. The property manager had demanded immediate payment of the full security deposit penalty, which she couldn't provide. My parents' mortgage company called them directly that afternoon, demanding immediate payment of all arrears plus penalties. When they couldn't provide it, the foreclosure timeline accelerated from 90 days to 30 days. But I wasn't done yet. I discovered that my parents had also opened a joint business account with my sister for her consulting venture. They'd contributed $25,000 as seed money, despite being behind on their mortgage. I contacted their bank and reported suspicious activity on the account, noting that large transfers were occurring while the account holders were in financial distress. The bank immediately froze the account pending investigation. My sister lost access to the remaining $18,000 she'd been planning to use for initial business expenses. By Thursday, my phone was ringing constantly. Mom left angry voicemails calling me vindictive and cruel. Dad sent text messages begging me to reconsider, saying they never meant to hurt me. My sister alternated between apologetic calls and furious accusations. I ignored them all. Friday brought the news I'd been expecting. The private investigator called to inform me that my parents were now seeking emergency legal counsel for both the foreclosure and the frozen account investigation. My sister had also been contacted by her former business partners, who were threatening legal action over unpaid debts from her previous venture. That weekend, I finally answered one of my sister's calls. Her voice was hoarse from crying as she told me that everything was falling apart. She'd lost the office space, couldn't access her business funds, and now faced potential lawsuits from multiple creditors. She begged me to help fix the situation, promising she'd never ask for anything again. I listened in silence until she finished. Then I told her exactly what she'd told me at countless family dinners over the years, that sometimes people needed to learn from their mistakes and face the consequences of their choices. Monday brought the final pieces falling into place. My parents received official foreclosure papers with a 15-day eviction notice. The bank investigation had uncovered not just the suspicious transfers, but also several other financial irregularities in their handling of the second mortgage funds. My sister's business account remained frozen, and she'd received formal demands for payment from 3 different creditors. Her credit score had plummeted, making it impossible for her to secure new financing for any future ventures. That evening, Dad finally called me directly. His voice was defeated as he explained that they were going to lose everything. He said he understood why I was angry, but asked if I could find it in my heart to forgive them. He admitted they'd handled everything wrong and that they should have respected my decision about the inheritance. I told him I appreciated his honesty, but that respect wasn't something you asked for after the fact. I explained that their actions had shown me exactly how they viewed our relationship. I was a resource to be exploited, not a family member to be respected. The conversation ended with Dad asking what it would take to fix things. I told him that some things couldn't be fixed, only learned from. Update 1. 2 weeks later, my parents were served with final foreclosure papers. They had 7 days to vacate the house I'd grown up in. My sister had moved back in with them after losing her apartment lease, so all 3 of them were facing homelessness together. Mom made one last attempt at reconciliation, showing up at my workplace during lunch. She looked exhausted and older than I'd ever seen her. She told me that she was sorry for how they'd handled things, but that family was supposed to forgive each other. She said they needed me now more than ever. I explained that forgiveness wasn't the same as enabling, and that helping them avoid consequences would only teach them that their behavior was acceptable. I told her that I'd learned this lesson from watching them bail out my sister repeatedly over the years. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Update 2. A month after the dinner table confrontation, my family lost their house. They moved into a small rental apartment across town, cramped together in a space designed for one person. My sister took a retail job at minimum wage, her entrepreneurial dreams officially on hold. My parents both took part-time work to help cover expenses. Dad delivered food in the evenings after his regular job, while Mom cleaned offices on weekends. The lifestyle change was dramatic and humbling. During this time, I received a letter from my grandfather's lawyer. Apparently, there was an additional clause in the will that I hadn't been made aware of initially. If I chose to share my inheritance with family members within the first year, the estate would match any amount up to $200,000. The letter explained that my grandfather had hoped his bequest would bring the family closer together, but he'd also included this provision as a test of character, both mine and theirs. I sat with this information for several days, weighing my options. I could help them and actually come out ahead financially. But I kept thinking about that dinner table moment, about Mom's ultimatum and the assumption that my money was somehow theirs by right. I decided not to tell them about the matching clause. Update 3. 6 months after everything began, I received an unexpected call from Dad. His voice sounded different, humbler, more thoughtful. He told me that losing the house had been devastating initially, but that it had also forced them to confront some difficult truths about their family dynamics. He explained that they'd started family therapy, all three of them together. The therapist had helped them understand how their pattern of enabling my sister had created an unhealthy dynamic that eventually extended to their treatment of me. Dad said they'd come to realize that my refusal to hand over the inheritance wasn't selfishness. It was the first time anyone in the family had set a healthy boundary. He admitted that they'd taken my support for granted for years, always assuming I'd be there to solve their problems. The conversation lasted 2 hours. We talked about childhood memories, about the gradual shift in family dynamics over the years, and about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on more equal terms. Dad didn't ask for money. He didn't mention the inheritance at all. Instead, he asked if I'd be willing to join them for therapy sessions, to work on repairing the damage that had been done to our family relationships. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anger toward my family. I told him I'd think about it. Today, as I write this, I'm still thinking about it. The inheritance sits in my investment account, growing steadily. My family is slowly rebuilding their lives, learning to function without their previous financial safety nets. Sometimes I wonder if my grandfather would approve of how things played out. His matching clause remains unused, but perhaps the real test wasn't about the money at all. Maybe it was about learning when to help and when to step back, when to forgive and when to maintain boundaries. The dinner table ultimatum had been meant to force my compliance, but instead it forced a reckoning that was years overdue. My family learned that love and loyalty can't be demanded or manipulated into existence. They have to be earned, maintained, and respected. Whether we can rebuild what was broken remains to be seen. But for the first time in my adult life, any future relationship will be based on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. And that, I think, is worth more than any inheritance.